Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present you the new Cover W6N707D free arm from W6 WERTARBEIT. It's a 4-thread cover stitch machine. 4 threads means we have 3 upper threads. So we also have 3 needles and a looper thread hidden behind the flap. More on that later. As the name suggests, this is a free arm cover stitch machine. You can take this case off if needed. Now with a cover stitch machine, you'll be sewing lots of sleeves and trouser legs, so that is what the free arm is for. Should you ever need to sew larger parts, we also offer an optional extension table that can be attached here. This would then mean that you also have fantastic strain relief. The machine is equipped with a rotary control for adjusting the pressure of the presser foot. That means you can set how firmly the foot presses down onto your fabric. If you set a higher number, the foot presses harder on the fabric. If you set a lower number, the pressure is reduced. This is a 4-thread machine, so we have 4 thread tensioners. This means that we can set an individual tension for each thread up here. For easy transport of the machine from one place to another, we have equipped it with a handle. For transport, it is also important that the machine is small and that we do not break our cone pins here. That means we can just remove the telescopic arm without a screwdriver, and also back here you can slide out the entire cone rack. And the big advantage is that there is no need for fiddly removal of screws. Okay, let's put this back in. Our cone rack is secure without any screws. Done. On the right, we have the lever for the presser foot. With this you can raise and lower the presser foot. Below that is the knob for the stitch length. A good length for cover stitches is 2.5 to 4 mm. And below that is the knob for the differential feed. If a machine is equipped with a differential feed, this means that it has a 2-part feed dog. If you set it to a number higher than 1, the front part of the feed dog will run faster than the rear part, and the machine will compress the fabric slightly. If you set it to a number below 1, the front part of the feed dog will run slower than the rear part, and the machine will stretch the fabric slightly. As I said, the machine has 3 top threads and 1 looper thread. With just 1 looper thread, it is clear that you also have only 1 looper, and for this looper the machine is equipped with a quick threader here. This makes threading the looper thread fairly easy. Now we've included an illustration in the looper cover so that you don't have to use the operating instructions every time you want to thread your machine. Accessories include a pair of tweezers, a hexagon screwdriver, a threader for the needles. Then we have thread stoppers in case you are using smaller cones or spools of thread to put on top, spool nets for when the thread falls off the spools or cones while sewing, then you can secure it with the nets. We are using EL needles. Only the EL705 needle system is suitable for this machine. That is a special needle system for cover stitch machines and must always be used on this model. Please do not try using regular sewing machine needles. It will not work. These inserts for large spools or overclock cones are also included, as is a brush, oil, a screwdriver and the accessory box. Changing the presser foot at a cover stitch machine is the same as for a regular sewing machine. At the back here is a little red lever. Push that up, the foot is released. Now you can pull it out to the front if you want. When you place your new foot on the throat plate, make sure to press the red lever again so it engages properly. See, now the foot has snapped on. Now let's thread our cover stitch machine. To do this, it's important that the presser foot is up so that the thread tensions are open, just as with a regular sewing machine. We take our thread, pull this up over the telescopic arm and through this guide here. It hangs in there loosely. We guide the thread to the top of the machine. There's a pre-tension unit here and it has a pre-tension hook at the side. And that's why you have to pull in the thread. Listen, you have to hear the thread snap in. Only then it's properly in. Now hold really tight with both hands. You then pull the thread under the pre-tension disc. When you lift the thread, you can see that the disc moves too. Then guide the thread downwards through the rightmost channel. Then, with the front flap open, thread it through the guide hook from right to left. Next, the thread goes through this spiral. Just pull it through from right to left. Feed it through with the tweezers and take it with the other hand. Down here there are 2 more hooks. One is open at the top, the other at the bottom. That means at the first hook we thread from the top down and at the second from the bottom up. That's that. Next is the heart of the looper tensioner, the quick threading spring hook. So now let's thread this quick threading spring hook properly. Grab the thread with the tweezers, pull it under the hook through to the back and up over the metal bar, and if you pull it now, you'll see that the thread runs under the hook. At this point, do a little tension test. When you pull your thread, the quick threading spring hook is now lifted. If that is the case, you did it correctly. That's how it must always be done. Now continue to put the thread through this eyelet here. Make sure it doesn't slide out. Then grab it, pull it up and through the looper. Pull some length of thread through to make sure it doesn't slide out again. Now take the thread and guide it through this hook. This is the preparation for the quick threading unit. The thread is running through there now. So now you have to pull the quick threading unit down. Pull it down to the stop. And you can see now, here is a hook. It takes the thread to the back and that finishes off the threading of the looper. And here's something important. Normally we take this loose thread and guide it up here and to the back. That's what you would do with an overlocker. With the Coverstitch machine, you leave it down here and close the flap. Run the next thread up here over the telescopic arm and down to the pretension unit. The same as before. Properly pull the thread into the lateral pretension hook. You have to hear the thread snap in. That's in. Guide the thread under here and do the pull test. When you pull up the thread, the disc has to move. Then down through the main tension here. Now you have to be careful. The green thread goes in here. Grab it with the tweezers, put it behind the hook and over here. Then through the last hook and upwards over the thread hook. It has to properly run over the thread hook. Then down through the far right slot and next is the needle. Guide the thread through this thread guide hook up here. You have to pay a little attention as there are 3 thread guides. We need the far right. That's how it needs to look. Now push the thread through the needle eye from front to back. Make sure you thread the far right needle. Pay attention not to form any knots or loops and then pass it through the foot from above and leave it hanging to the back. Threading of the middle needle is roughly the same as before. Run the thread over the top of the telescopic arm. Properly pull the thread into the pretension hook with a sound, then along the pretension disc. You see the disc is moving. Then through the main tension and down the middle channel. The next bit is interesting. For this thread we need to use the middle guide. Right along here, through the middle guide, over the thread hook and through the middle slot. That's not a problem. At the double thread guide clamp, you also use the middle groove. Then guide it behind the bottom hook and through the needle. All in all, it's the same as before. The only thing is that you have to do these steps 3 times because you have 3 needles. Pull the thread out of the needle at the back and down through the foot. So through here and to the back. There it is. Now this looks really good. Now check again that you haven't made a mistake. Up here you see that the blue thread is too far right. Guide it through the middle groove. Now everything is perfect. You see the green on the right, the blue in the middle, and they're properly separated. For the far left needle, you do the same all over again. Thread over the telescopic arm. Next is the lateral pretension hook. The thread engages with a snap. That's in. Pull it under here. You see, the disc moves, which means the pretension is correctly threaded. Pull it down through the main tension. Now let's see behind this guide, through the far left guide, upwards, over the thread guide hook, down again, and through the far left slot. Then through the far left groove and the double thread guide clamp. Let's see if that's correct. Then it goes behind the last hook and through the needle. Threading of the other 2 is finished already. So through here. Pull and check if everything is okay. That's got to go behind there. Now this thread is a bit stubborn. This is correct. You see, all 3 threads are running neatly side by side. Guide the last thread through the foot, like this, and put it in the back. Now the threading is completed. The very first thing I want to show you is how to do a seam with 3 upper threads. That means all 3 needles are properly threaded. Now, this seam is especially useful for necklines or stable shoulder seams. It also works well for hemming t-shirts, and of course for knitwear or any other kinds of stretchy fabric. This is a very versatile seam. The important thing now is thread tension. I set all 3 needle tensions to 4. For the looper you can set the tension to 3 or 4. Not all 3 tensioners have to be set to the same tension. With this machine you may have to readjust tension depending on the fabric you are using. Between 3 and 4 is fine. For this fabric I'm using 4. The stitch length is set to 2.5 and the differential to N. So, here we go. Now let's take a look. At the top we have the 3 straight stitching lines. At the back we have a perfect cover seam. Next we'll sew another wide cover seam, but this time I've removed the center needle. That means we have 2 needle threads and 1 looper thread. This seam is also 5.6 mm wide. We can also use it to sew knitwear. It can be used as a decorative seam. You can hem sleeves, hem t-shirts, or do any other elastic stitching and hemming. Before we start sewing, let me give you an urgent and important piece of advice. I removed the middle needle. Please always do that, as I've done it here. You must not leave the unthreaded needle in. Never think I can't be bothered to remove that. I can tell you, the stitch pattern will look terrible. Take the needle out, there is no other way, otherwise you'll not have a clean stitch pattern. I'm sure you've seen this kind of stitching before. Many t-shirts have these kinds of hems. Let's turn that around. That's better. Now on the wrong side, a perfect cover stitch seam. So next I want to show you how to sew a narrow cover stitch seam. For this purpose you need to remove the far right needle. Please always actually remove the needle you don't need. In this case we have the middle and the far left needle. The width of the seam is 2.9 mm. Place your fabric under the needle, align it with the right side of the presser foot, foot down, and off we go. We can also sew nice and slow, because we have an electronically controlled foot pedal. Now this is the narrow cover stitch seam on the right side and on the wrong side. This is something for hemming sleeves or t-shirts. I wouldn't recommend it for loosely knit or thick fabrics. With those fabric I would always use the wide seam. So the 4th seam I'll show you is the double chain stitch. Now the machine is capable of sewing a fantastic chain stitch. To do this, you first need to change the thread tensions. The looper tension is set to 7. The needle tension remains at 4, and we only use the middle needle. And then you're good to go. That's all you need to do. A super straight seam, and on the back you can see how great it looks. This is a chain stitch. Awesome, right? And above all, this seam is stretchy. Now with this you have a straight stitch that is perfectly stretchy and also very sturdy, and can also be used as a decorative stitch. Come here, bring it. Thank you. Sit, sit. We now have to show our viewers that we have a 3-needle cover stitch seam in here. You see that? A 3-needle cover stitch that's really strong and stable. This is a stretchy cushion cover that we have sewn for you, so that you can play with the cushion. Okay, take it back. Here. Did you get it? Off you go. Alright, let's try hemming a t-shirt now. With the cover stitch machine you always have the difficulty of any cross seams that run along your stitching area. The most important thing is to have the seams lie neatly on top of each other, and please do me a favor, always press them. So don't try skipping the pressing and quickly stitching over it. That will not work, not at all. Okay, let's place our fabric under the presser foot. Now let me show you how it's done. Lower the presser foot. We are using the white Coverstitch seam here, 5.6 millimeters. Now let's start sewing. The first bit is quite easy, no problem. We are approaching the cross seam. Continue sewing just up to the cross seam. Then stop. It's important to remember that this is a loop stitching machine. If you're worried it might skip a stitch when sewing over a cross stitch, make sure you go slowly and have your fabric pressed properly. Of course, we did that with our shirt. Please set the thread tensions a little higher. Okay, let's turn this by one turn. Work slowly and carefully using the hand wheel and help guiding the fabric with the other hand. Always pay attention, turn the hand wheel forwards and leave the needles in the fabric. Now you can lift the presser foot a little and make sure your fabric lies flat. Otherwise your stitching line will shift. Keep turning the wheel. Lift the foot and push some more fabric under. In this way you can work your way through this tricky bit slowly but surely. Always make sure that your stitching doesn't shift on one side. The point where you've just sewn over the quick area, but it is still under the foot, needs the most attention as there is a hollow space between the foot and the fabric. Now you can go faster again. We're through. Now here's another problem. With a closed hem we are sewing in the round. Previously we used small scraps. We just sewed until the fabric came out at the back. But what to do if your fabric doesn't really have an end? When you turn the hand wheel forwards, raise your foot and try to pull out the fabric. Nothing will happen. It doesn't work. When you've reached the end of your seam, you need to turn the hand wheel backwards by one full turn. One full turn backwards, raise the foot and then take out the fabric. If the fabric is still stuck, do another full turn backwards with the hand wheel. You see, now at the second turn the knot has come undone. I can pull this out easily and cut the threads. Now there's one last thing to remember. The loose threads must be pulled onto the wrong side and tied. You have to secure the threads to make sure the stitching doesn't unravel. So now let me show you what this looks like. See, this is the bit over the cross seam. It looks pretty neat. Here you can see that again. We've sewn over this cross seam, a cross seam that was neatly pressed before. This is the wrong side and this is the right side. See, it looks just fine. This is the finished dress on a hanger. It hangs really neatly and the hem looks nice and even, a perfect finish. Very important with this cover stitch machine is to always use the 1000 meter yarn cones by W6. This high quality yarn makes sure that the machine won't skip any stitches. For the versatile programs of the machine, you need to use a particularly high quality yarn. The W6 yarns are smooth and perfectly suited for this cover stitch machine. They are available in over 400 colors. Another thing that is very important, the needles. We put a special sticker on ours. These are ELX705 needles of size 80 or 90. It doesn't matter if you use 80 or 90, but they have to be EL needles and they should be W6 WERTARBEIT too. In addition, when threading, please always make sure that the foot is up. When you have finished threading, pull the telescopic arm again at the back, holding it firmly, of course, to make sure that the threads are correctly tensioned, otherwise it definitely won't work. When threading, especially when threading the needles, the following is important. Before you thread the thread hook up here, the needle or all three needles, depending on how many you're using, must be in the highest position. Otherwise it won't work. And if you only want to sew seams with two needles, as is the case here, it is absolutely essential to remove the third needle. This is to prevent an unsightly stitch pattern. When sewing over cross seams, for instance, which I showed you earlier, it's also very important that you don't sew over them in a rush. Go slowly, do it with care and guide the fabric with both hands. Then it will work out fine. If you're still having trouble here, remember, increase the thread tension. Increasing the thread tension minimizes the tendency of the machine to skip stitches over cross seams. Now have fun completing your projects on your new cover stitch machine. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a little advice. Subscribe to our W6 WERTARBEIT newsletter. If you subscribe, you'll be constantly kept up to date and, most importantly, can also benefit from our weekly discount promotions. Thank you.